What would you do if you were hired to work for the most feared millionaire in the city? When Clara Bennett left her small town to support her sick father, everyone warned her about Victor Ashford, a wealthy businessman who lived alone in a massive mansion. People said he was cold, heartless, and impossible to please. Most servants quit within weeks. But on her very first day, Clara noticed something strange. Behind the expensive suits, behind the grand mansion, and behind all the wealth, she saw a man carrying a deep sadness. Then one day she discovered a forgotten garden, a hidden family photograph, and a stack of letters that had never been sent. What secret was the millionaire hiding? Why had he not spoken to his only son for 10 years? And how could a simple maid, with nothing but kindness and courage, help heal a family torn apart by loss, regret, and silence? Stay with me until the end of this emotional story, because what Clara does next will not only change the millionaire's life forever, it will change her own future in ways she never imagined. This is the story of the kind maid who changed a millionaire's life. Chapter 1, A New Beginning. The kind maid who changed a millionaire's life. The sun had barely risen over the small town of Willow Creek when 22-year-old Clara Bennett opened her eyes. The first rays of morning light slipped through the thin curtains of her modest bedroom, painting soft golden lines across the wooden floor. For a few moments, Clara lay still, listening to the familiar sounds of her home. She could hear birds singing outside her window and the gentle creaking of the old house as it woke with the day. Normally, these sounds brought her comfort, but this morning her heart felt heavy. Life had changed dramatically over the past year. Once the Bennett family had lived a simple but comfortable life. Clara's father, Thomas Bennett, owned a small carpentry workshop in Willow Creek. He was known throughout the town for his honesty and skill. People often travelled from nearby villages to order furniture from him. But everything changed when Thomas became seriously ill. The sickness came without warning. At first, it was only occasional weakness and fatigue. Then it grew worse. Soon he could no longer spend long hours in the workshop. Orders were delayed, customers went elsewhere, and the family's savings slowly disappeared. Clara's mother, Margaret, tried her best to keep the family together. She sewed clothes for neighbours and sold homemade bread at the local market, but the money was never enough. Every week brought new expenses: medicine, food, house repairs, bills. The burden seemed endless. Clara had watched her parents struggle in silence, pretending everything would somehow work out. But she knew the truth. The family needed help, and she was determined to provide it. That morning, Clara dressed quickly and joined her parents in the kitchen. The room was small but warm. The scent of freshly baked bread filled the air. Her mother smiled as Clara entered. "Good morning, dear." "Good morning, Mother." Thomas sat quietly at the table, a blanket draped over his shoulders despite the mild weather. His face looked thinner than it had a year ago. Clara hated seeing him like this. He had always been strong, the strongest person she knew. Now even lifting a cup of tea seemed difficult. Thomas noticed her expression and forced a smile. "Don't look at me like that," he said gently. "I'm still here." Clara smiled back. "I know." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Margaret broke the silence. "Have you thought more about the job in the city?" Clara nodded. "Yes." Several days earlier, news had spread through Willow Creek that Victor Ashford, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the country, was searching for household staff for his enormous estate in the city of Ravenhill. The position offered excellent pay, far more than Clara could earn in Willow Creek. Unfortunately, the job came with a warning. Victor Ashford had a terrible reputation. People described him as cold, demanding, and impossible to satisfy. Many employees left after only a few months. Some lasted only weeks. Others lasted mere days. Stories about him circulated everywhere. He treats people like machines. He never smiles. He doesn't trust anyone. Working for him is miserable. Most people avoided the opportunity, but Clara saw something different. She saw a chance to help her family. Thomas looked at his daughter carefully. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do. There must be another way." Clara reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "We've used nearly all our savings." Her father lowered his eyes. She immediately regretted speaking so bluntly, but it was true. Everyone knew it. "We'll manage somehow," Thomas said. Clara shook her head. "No, Father, you've spent your whole life taking care of us. Let me take care of you now." For a moment, emotion filled his eyes. He wanted to argue. Instead, he simply nodded. Margaret stood and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "We'll miss you." Clara hugged her tightly. "I'll come back." "Promise?" "I promise." Although she sounded confident, fear lingered deep inside her heart. She had never left Willow Creek, never travelled alone, never worked in a grand mansion, and certainly never met a millionaire. Yet she knew she had no choice. 2 days later, Clara packed her belongings into a single worn suitcase. She owned very little: a few dresses, several books, family photographs, a notebook, and a silver necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. Everything she valued fit inside one small case. The morning of her departure, the entire town seemed quieter than usual. Perhaps it only felt that way because Clara was nervous. Neighbours stopped to wish her luck. Shopkeepers waved goodbye. Friends promised to write letters. As the stagecoach prepared to leave, Clara hugged her parents one last time. Her mother cried openly. Her father held her shoulders. "You are stronger than you think." Clara swallowed hard. "I'll make you proud." "You already have." The coach driver called for passengers. Clara climbed aboard. As the horses began moving, she looked back through the window. Her parents stood together in the road, growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared from sight. Only then did Clara allow tears to fall. The journey to Ravenhill took nearly 8 hours. The scenery changed gradually. Rolling fields became busy roads. Quiet farms became crowded neighbourhoods. Small cottages became towering buildings. By late afternoon, Ravenhill appeared on the horizon. Clara stared in amazement. She had never seen anything so large. The city seemed alive. People hurried through the streets. Carriages moved in every direction. Merchants shouted from market stalls. Music drifted from distant cafes. Everything felt bigger, faster, more exciting, and more intimidating. When the coach finally stopped at the central station, Clara stepped onto the bustling street. For a moment, she simply stood there, overwhelmed. Then she remembered why she had come. She took a deep breath and unfolded the piece of paper containing the address of Ashford Manor. After asking for directions several times, she eventually found a carriage willing to take her there. As they travelled farther from the city centre, the streets grew quieter. Large houses appeared behind iron gates. Beautiful gardens stretched across vast properties. Wealth surrounded her on every side. Yet nothing prepared her for what she saw when they reached Ashford Manor. The carriage slowed, then stopped. Clara's eyes widened. The estate was enormous. Massive stone walls surrounded the property. Elegant fountains decorated the entrance. Perfectly trimmed hedges lined the pathways. The mansion itself looked less like a home and more like a palace. 3 stories high, dozens of windows, tall columns, grand balconies. It was unlike anything she had ever imagined. The driver unloaded her suitcase. "Good luck," he said. Clara wasn't sure whether his tone was encouraging or sympathetic. She approached the gates. A security guard greeted her. "Name?" "Clara Bennett." He checked a list, then nodded. "Expected." The gates slowly opened. As Clara walked toward the mansion, nervous thoughts raced through her mind. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she failed? What if the stories were true? A woman in a dark uniform greeted her at the front entrance. She appeared to be in her 50s and carried herself with authority. "I'm Mrs. Hawthorne, the housekeeper." "Nice to meet you." Mrs. Hawthorne examined Clara carefully, not unkindly, but thoroughly. "You arrived on time. That's a good start." Clara smiled nervously. "Thank you." Mrs. Hawthorne led her inside. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings. Paintings decorated the walls. Marble floors reflected the light. Everything looked expensive, perfect, yet strangely empty. The mansion felt beautiful but lifeless, like a museum rather than a home. As they walked through endless hallways, Clara noticed something unusual. There were very few people. For such a large estate, the atmosphere felt quiet. Too quiet. Finally, Mrs. Hawthorne stopped near a staircase. "Before you begin work, there are some things you should know." Clara listened attentively. "The staff is expected to maintain the highest standards." "I understand. Mr. Ashford values punctuality." "I understand. He dislikes unnecessary conversation." Clara nodded again. Mrs. Hawthorne hesitated, then added quietly, "And he prefers not to be disturbed." Clara remembered all the stories she had heard: the cold millionaire, the difficult employer, the lonely man. Suddenly, the mansion's silence made more sense. "Is he really as strict as people say?" Clara asked carefully. Mrs. Hawthorne considered the question. Finally, she answered, "Mr. Ashford is not cruel." Clara felt relieved. "But he is a deeply unhappy man." The answer surprised her. Mrs. Hawthorne continued, "Most people see his temper. Few people see his pain." Before Clara could ask what she meant, footsteps echoed from the upper floor. The housekeeper immediately straightened. "He's coming." Clara's heart began racing. A tall man descended the staircase. He appeared to be in his early 60s. His dark suit was perfectly tailored. His silver hair was neatly combed. His posture was confident. Yet there was something tired about him. Something distant. His eyes briefly met Clara's. For reasons she could not explain, she felt sadness behind them. Mrs. Hawthorne spoke first. "Sir, this is Clara Bennett, the new maid." Victor Ashford studied her. The silence stretched. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5. Clara wondered if she should say something. Then he finally spoke. "Have you worked in a house like this before?" "No, sir." "Then you have much to learn." His voice was calm but cold. "I'll work hard." "I expect that." Another silence followed. Then he turned away. Mrs. Hawthorne looked embarrassed, but Clara wasn't offended. Instead, she found herself curious. Victor Ashford had everything a person could want: money, power, a magnificent home. Yet, he looked less happy than many of the poor families in Willow Creek. As he disappeared down the hallway, Clara couldn't stop thinking about Mrs. Hawthorne's words. Most people see his temper. Few people see his pain. That evening, Clara unpacked her belongings in a small staff room overlooking the gardens. The room was simple but comfortable. As the sun set beyond the distant trees, she sat beside the window and looked across the enormous estate. Everything felt unfamiliar. The city, the mansion, the people, the future. Yet despite her fears, she felt something else. Hope. She had come to Ravenhill to help her family, but somehow she sensed that this journey would become much more important than she imagined. Far below, lights began appearing throughout the estate. The mansion glowed against the darkening sky. Beautiful, silent, lonely. Clara watched it carefully. She had arrived only hours earlier. Already, she could feel that Ashford Manor held secrets. And at the centre of those secrets stood Victor Ashford, the wealthy millionaire whose life was about to change in ways neither of them could yet imagine. End of chapter 1. Up chapter 2. The Man Behind the Mansion. The next morning, Clara woke before sunrise. For a few moments she forgot where she was. Then she saw the unfamiliar ceiling above her bed and remembered. Ashford Manor, her new job, her new life. The room was quiet except for the distant chirping of birds outside the window. Clara sat up and looked across the gardens. Morning mist floated over the grass, making the estate look almost magical. It was beautiful. Yet there was still something strange about the place. Something lonely. After dressing quickly, Clara joined the household staff in the kitchen. The room was already busy. Cooks prepared breakfast, servants carried trays, housekeepers organised schedules. Everyone moved efficiently, speaking in low voices. Mrs. Hawthorne stood near a large table checking a clipboard. When she saw Clara, she nodded. "Good, you're early." "My father always said that being late creates problems before the day even begins." A faint smile appeared on Mrs. Hawthorne's face. "Your father sounds wise." Clara smiled. "He is." For the next several hours, Clara worked non-stop. She dusted furniture, cleaned hallways, polished mirrors, organised guest rooms that hadn't been used in years. The mansion seemed endless. Every corridor led to another corridor. Every room opened into 3 more. By midday, Clara felt as though she had walked several miles. Yet she enjoyed the work. Being busy kept her mind from worrying about home. As she carried fresh linens upstairs, she noticed something unusual. Most of the rooms looked untouched, perfectly maintained, perfectly empty. One room contained children's toys. Another held shelves filled with books and photographs. A third contained musical instruments covered with protective cloth. Each room seemed frozen in time, as if someone had simply stopped using them one day. Clara wanted to ask about them, but she remembered Mrs. Hawthorne's warning. Don't ask unnecessary questions, so she remained silent. The silent breakfast. The following morning, Clara was assigned to help serve breakfast. At exactly 7 o'clock, Victor Ashford entered the dining room. The room itself was enormous. A long polished table stretched across the centre. Crystal chandeliers hung above. Tall windows allowed sunlight to pour inside. The table could easily seat 20 people. Only one chair was occupied. Victor sat alone. A servant placed coffee beside him. Another served toast. A third delivered fruit. Nobody spoke. The silence felt unnatural. Clara watched from a distance. Victor unfolded a newspaper and began reading. His expression never changed. He didn't smile. He didn't seem angry either. He simply looked, detached, like a man existing without truly living. The thought surprised Clara. She had known many poor people in Willow Creek. Most faced daily struggles. Yet many still laughed, still shared meals, still enjoyed life. Victor Ashford possessed more wealth than everyone in her town combined. Yet happiness seemed completely absent from his world. As breakfast ended, Victor stood and prepared to leave. Suddenly he stopped. His eyes landed on Clara. "You." Clara nearly dropped the tray she was carrying. "Yes, sir." "The flowers in the west hallway." "Sir?" "They haven't been replaced." Clara remembered seeing them yesterday. The roses had started wilting. "I'm sorry, sir." Victor stared at her. For a moment she expected criticism. Instead he simply said, "See that it is done." Then he walked away. Clara blinked. That was all? No anger, no shouting, no threats, just a simple instruction. Perhaps the stories had exaggerated his reputation, or perhaps she had simply caught him on a good day. A curious discovery. That afternoon, Clara replaced the flowers as requested. While arranging fresh roses, she noticed a framed photograph on a nearby table. It showed Victor standing beside a beautiful woman and a young boy. All three were smiling, genuinely smiling. The difference was astonishing. The man in the picture looked nothing like the Victor Ashford she knew. This version looked happy, relaxed, alive. Clara studied the image carefully. The woman appeared kind and elegant. The boy looked around 10 years old. A family. A real family. Before Clara could look longer, a voice startled her. That photograph was taken 20 years ago. She turned quickly. Mrs. Hawthorne stood behind her. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "I wasn't trying to pry." The housekeeper walked closer. Her expression softened as she looked at the picture. His wife, Eleanor. And their son, Daniel. Clara glanced at the smiling faces. What happened? Mrs. Hawthorne hesitated. For a moment, Clara thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke quietly. Eleanor died. Clara's heart sank. Oh, it happened 18 years ago. The silence that followed felt heavy. What about his son? Clara asked carefully. Mrs. Hawthorne sighed. They had a disagreement many years later. And Daniel left. The answer was short, but Clara sensed a much larger story behind it. A painful one. He hasn't come back? Mrs. Hawthorne shook her head. No. Clara looked at the photograph again. For the first time, she began understanding the sadness hidden within Ashford Manor. This mansion wasn't empty because Victor preferred solitude. It was empty because everyone he loved was gone. An unexpected moment. Several days passed. Clara continued working hard. She learned routines, memorized schedules, earned the respect of other staff members. Everyone liked her. She was cheerful, reliable, kind, qualities that seemed increasingly rare in the mansion. One rainy afternoon, dark clouds covered Ravenhill. Heavy rain struck the windows. Thunder echoed across the estate. Most people remained indoors. While carrying laundry through a hallway, Clara noticed light coming from a small room she had never entered before. The door stood slightly open. Inside sat Victor Ashford, alone. Again, he was staring at a fireplace, not reading, not working, simply staring. For a moment, Clara considered walking away. Then she noticed something. The photograph, the same family photograph she had seen earlier, it rested in his hands. Victor looked older than usual, tired, broken almost. Without thinking, Clara took a step forward. The floorboard creaked. Victor looked up immediately. His expression hardened. What is it? I'm sorry, sir. Clara hesitated. I didn't mean to disturb you. Then why are you here? She almost left. Almost. But something stopped her. Perhaps it was the loneliness she saw in his eyes, or perhaps it was simply her nature. I was wondering if you'd like some tea. Victor looked surprised. The question clearly caught him off guard. Tea? Yes, sir. Silence. I didn't ask for tea. I know. Another silence. Longer this time. Finally, Clara added, You just looked like you might need some. Victor stared at her. No servant had ever said such a thing. Employees followed instructions. They completed tasks. They avoided personal conversations. But this young woman had noticed something nobody else seemed willing to acknowledge. that he was hurting. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Victor looked back toward the fireplace. "Very well." Clara smiled. "I'll bring some." 20 minutes later, she returned, carrying a silver tray, fresh tea, warm biscuits, a small bowl of honey. She placed everything on a nearby table. "Thank you." The words sounded unusual coming from him, almost as if he rarely used them. "You're welcome, sir." As Clara turned to leave, Victor suddenly spoke again. "Why did you come here?" She stopped. "For work. Many people need work." "That's true." "Then why this place?" Clara considered her answer. "Because my family needs help." Victor nodded. That much made sense. But Clara continued, "And because I don't believe people are always what others say they are." Victor slowly looked up. "What does that mean?" Clara immediately worried she had spoken too boldly. "Still," she answered honestly, "before I arrived, everyone told me you were cold and impossible to work for." His expression darkened slightly, and I decided to find out for myself. The room became silent. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Victor studied her face, searching, evaluating. Then something unexpected happened. A tiny smile appeared, not much, barely noticeable, but it was there. The first smile Clara had ever seen from him. "It seems you've reached a conclusion." "Not yet." Victor raised an eyebrow. "No?" Clara shook her head. "I've only been here a week." For the first time, Victor actually laughed, a short laugh, a quiet laugh, but a genuine one, and somehow in that small moment the enormous mansion felt a little less empty. The beginning of change. That evening, Clara returned to her room feeling strangely hopeful. She couldn't explain why. Nothing major had happened. No great event, no dramatic revelation, only a simple conversation, a cup of tea, a brief smile. Yet she sensed something important. For years, everyone around Victor Ashford had focused on his wealth, his power, his reputation. Very few people had treated him like an ordinary human being, a man who had suffered loss, a man carrying grief, a man who felt alone. Clara didn't know whether she could truly help him. She wasn't a doctor or a counselor or a miracle worker. She was simply a young woman trying to support her family. But perhaps kindness didn't need special qualifications. Perhaps sometimes the smallest gestures mattered most. As rain continued falling outside her window, Clara looked across the dark gardens. Somewhere inside the vast mansion, Victor Ashford sat alone with his memories. For the first time in many years, however, something had changed. A tiny crack had appeared in the wall surrounding his heart, and neither of them yet realized how important that small crack would become. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Locked Garden. The days following their conversation passed quietly, but Clara noticed something had changed. Not dramatically, not enough for most people to see, but she saw it. Victor Ashford no longer ignored her presence. When their paths crossed in the hallways, he would nod politely. Sometimes he even said good morning. To anyone else, these small gestures might have seemed insignificant, but according to the older staff members, they were remarkable. One afternoon, Clara was helping organize books in the mansion's library when Mrs. Hawthorne approached. "You've done something unusual." Clara looked up. "What do you mean?" The housekeeper adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Ashford asked about you." Clara blinked. "He did?" Mrs. Hawthorne nodded. "He wanted to know how you're settling in." "That's all?" "That may not sound important," Mrs. Hawthorne said, "but in 15 years, I've never heard him ask about a servant's well-being." Clara didn't know what to say. She simply smiled and returned to her work. Yet deep inside, she felt encouraged. Perhaps the lonely man she had glimpsed behind Victor's cold exterior was beginning to emerge. A stormy evening, that evening. Dark clouds gathered over Ravenhill once again. Strong winds swept across the estate. Tree branches swayed violently. Rain hammered against the windows. Most of the staff hurried to finish their work before the storm grew worse. Clara was carrying clean towels upstairs when a sudden crash echoed through the mansion. She jumped. Several servants rushed toward the sound. Moments later, they discovered a large tree branch had broken during the storm and smashed through part of a glass greenhouse near the back gardens. Nobody was injured, but the damage was significant. Mrs. Hawthorne immediately began organizing repairs. "Everyone stay clear of the greenhouse until morning." The staff nodded. Everyone except Clara. As she looked through a nearby window, she noticed Victor standing outside despite the rain. He wasn't examining the damage, he wasn't speaking to workers, he was simply staring at the greenhouse. His expression looked troubled, very troubled, almost as if the broken glass represented something much more important than property damage. The secret garden. The next morning the storm had passed. Sunlight sparkled across rain-soaked grass. Repair workers arrived early to fix the greenhouse. While helping move supplies, Clara overheard two gardeners talking. "It's a shame." "What is?" "The garden." "The rose garden?" "No, the one behind the greenhouse." Clara's curiosity immediately awakened. "What garden?" she asked. The older gardener looked surprised. "You don't know?" "No." The men exchanged glances. Then one shrugged. "I suppose nobody's shown you. What is it?" "A private garden." "Private?" "It belonged to Mrs. Ashford." Clara's eyes widened. Victor's late wife. The gardener pointed toward a distant section of the estate hidden behind tall hedges. "She designed it herself." "Can people visit?" The gardener shook his head. "Not anymore." "Why not?" "Mr. Ashford closed it after she died." The answer left Clara silent. Closed it 18 years ago. Suddenly, she remembered the sadness on Victor's face while staring at the greenhouse. The garden wasn't simply a piece of land. It was a memory. A painful one. A forgotten place. Later that afternoon, Clara found herself walking near the greenhouse. The repair crews had finished most of their work. Everything looked normal again. Almost. As she passed a narrow stone path, she noticed an old iron gate partially hidden behind climbing vines. The gate stood slightly open. Beyond it lay a garden unlike any she had ever seen. For a moment, Clara hesitated. She knew she shouldn't enter, yet curiosity pulled her forward. Slowly, she stepped through the gate. The garden was beautiful and heartbreaking. Stone pathways wound between flower beds. A small fountain stood at the center. White roses climbed wooden arches. Birds fluttered among the trees. Even after years of neglect, the place retained its charm. But nature had begun reclaiming it. Weeds grew between stones, bushes spread wildly, flowers struggled without care. The garden felt abandoned, like a beautiful story interrupted before reaching its ending. Clara walked slowly along the paths. She imagined Eleanor Ashford planting flowers here, laughing, dreaming, creating something special. Then she noticed something carved into a stone bench. Where kindness grows, happiness follows. The words seemed simple, yet somehow they touched her deeply. A voice suddenly interrupted her thoughts. "You shouldn't be here." Clara turned. Victor stood at the entrance. Her heart sank. I'm sorry, sir." His face remained unreadable. "This garden is closed." "I didn't know." "Now you do." Clara lowered her eyes. "I'll leave." She began walking toward the gate. Then Victor surprised her. "Wait." She stopped. Victor looked around the garden. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, he said quietly, "My wife loved this place." Clara remained silent. "He spent 3 years designing it." His voice softened. "Every flower was chosen personally." The sadness in his words was unmistakable. Clara glanced at the overgrown paths. It must have been beautiful. Victor gave a bitter smile. It was. For the first time, Clara noticed genuine grief in his eyes. Not anger, not coldness, grief, the kind that never completely disappears. Memories that refuse to fade. Victor slowly walked toward the fountain. Clara followed several steps behind. The roses were her favorite. He pointed toward a neglected flower bed. The fountain was Daniel's idea. His son's name seemed difficult for him to say. He was only 10 when it was built. For a moment, Victor almost smiled. He insisted the fish needed a castle. Clara looked into the fountain. A tiny stone castle still stood beneath the water, weathered by time, forgotten by most people, but still there, still waiting. "It sounds like he was creative," Clara said. Victor nodded. He was. Silence returned, a painful silence, the kind that follows memories. Finally, Clara asked softly, "Why did you stop coming here?" Victor stared at the fountain. His jaw tightened. "Because every corner reminds me of what I lost." The answer was immediate, honest, raw. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Clara looked around the garden once more. The flowers, the pathways, the fountain, the memories, everything here represented love, not loss, love. And somehow she felt compelled to say so. "Or maybe," she said carefully, "it reminds you of what you had." Victor looked at her. "What?" "Eleanor loved this place." "Yes. And your son helped build it." "Yes." Clara took a deep breath. "Then this garden isn't only about losing them." Victor's expression hardened slightly. "You don't understand." "No." Clara admitted. "I don't." How could she? She had never lost a spouse, never been separated from a child, but she continued anyway. "Still, I think people who love us leave pieces of themselves behind." Victor said nothing. The garden is one of those pieces. For a long moment the only sound was water trickling from the fountain. Then Victor quietly turned away. "I have work to do," and without another word, he left. The garden begins to change. The following morning, Clara was surprised to find several gardeners working inside the abandoned garden. Weeds were being removed, bushes were being trimmed, flowers were being replanted. Confused, she approached one of them. "What happened?" The gardener smiled. "Mr. Ashford gave orders." "He did?" "Yesterday evening." Clara looked around in amazement. The transformation had already begun. The neglected garden was coming back to life, just like that, without explanation, without announcement. Victor had made his decision quietly, yet the meaning was obvious. For the first time in 18 years, he had chosen not to hide from the memories. He had chosen to preserve them, honor them, perhaps even embrace them. As Clara watched workers restoring the garden, a warm feeling spread through her chest. The change was small, but it mattered, because healing rarely happens all at once. It happens one step at a time, one choice at a time, one act of courage at a time. And somewhere deep inside Victor Ashford's guarded heart, the first real steps toward healing had finally begun. What neither of them knew was that a much greater challenge was approaching. A challenge connected not to the past, but to the son who had been absent for nearly 10 years. And soon that challenge would change everything. End of chapter 3. Now chapter 4, The Letter Never Sent. The restoration of the garden continued for several weeks. Day by day, life slowly returned to the forgotten place. The overgrown hedges were trimmed, fresh flowers filled the empty beds. The fountain sparkled once again. The small stone castle Daniel had placed there as a child remained untouched, exactly where it had always been. Many members of the staff noticed the changes, but they noticed something even more surprising. Victor Ashford was changing too. Not completely, not overnight, yet little differences appeared every day. He spent less time locked inside his office. He spoke more politely to employees. Sometimes he even walked through the gardens in the evenings. The mansion still felt quiet, but it no longer felt lifeless. For the first time in years, hope seemed to exist within its walls. One afternoon, Clara was arranging books in the library when Victor entered unexpectedly. She immediately stood. "Good afternoon, sir." Victor nodded. "Miss Bennett." The formal title made Clara smile slightly. Victor glanced around the room, then toward the window, then back at Clara. It was obvious he wanted to say something, yet he seemed unsure how to begin. Finally, he spoke. "Would you walk with me?" Clara blinked. "Sir?" "The garden." She quickly nodded. "Of course." A walk through memories. The afternoon sun cast golden light across the estate. The restored garden looked beautiful. White roses bloomed beneath the arches. The fountain flowed peacefully. Birds sang from nearby trees. As they walked along the stone paths, Victor remained silent. Clara sensed he was thinking deeply. Finally, he stopped near the fountain. "My wife used to bring Daniel here every Sunday." Clara listened. "He loved feeding the fish." A faint smile appeared. "He always brought too much food." For a moment, Victor seemed far away, lost in another time, a happier time. "When Eleanor died," he continued, "I buried myself in work." His voice was calm, but the sadness beneath it was unmistakable. "I convinced myself it was necessary." Clara said nothing. Some stories needed room to breathe. "I thought success would distract me." Victor laughed bitterly. It didn't. The sound echoed softly through the garden. "Instead, I worked more." His eyes drifted toward the mansion. Then more. A pause. And more. The silence that followed felt heavy. Eventually, Clara asked softly, "And Daniel?" Victor's expression changed immediately. Pain, regret, guilt, all appeared at once. We argued. His answer was short, but Clara sensed the story was much larger. "What happened?" Victor stared into the fountain. For several moments she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke. He wanted a different life. A different life? He didn't want to join my business. Victor shook his head slowly. He wanted to become a teacher. The answer surprised Clara. A teacher? History. A faint smile appeared. He loved history. Clara felt her chest tighten. The situation suddenly seemed very familiar. A son with dreams, a father with expectations. Victor continued. I told him he was wasting his future. The regret in his voice was obvious. I thought I was helping him. And he disagreed. Victor nodded, strongly. The argument had happened nearly 10 years earlier, yet the wound still felt fresh. He left. The words barely rose above a whisper, and I let him. The locked drawer. That evening, Clara couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. For the first time, she understood the true source of Victor's loneliness. It wasn't only grief, it was regret. Regret for words spoken in anger. Regret for opportunities lost. Regret for a relationship left broken. The next morning, Clara entered Victor's office to deliver paperwork. The room was empty. He was attending a business meeting in the city. As she placed the documents on his desk, she noticed something unusual. A drawer stood slightly open. Inside lay dozens of envelopes, all addressed to the same person, Daniel Ashford. Curiosity immediately tugged at her. She knew she shouldn't look, yet one envelope had slipped partially out. On its front was a date, 3 years earlier, another, 5 years earlier, another, 7 years earlier. There were many, far too many. Clara quickly stepped away. She had seen enough. The discovery troubled her all day. Why would Victor keep so many letters? Why were they still here? Why hadn't he sent them? The answer arrived later that evening. A difficult truth. Victor returned home after sunset. He looked exhausted. As usual, he went directly to his office. An hour later, Clara brought him tea. When she entered, he was sitting at his desk, holding one of the letters. The same letters she had seen earlier. Without thinking, she spoke. You wrote to him. Victor looked up sharply. Realizing what she'd said, Clara immediately regretted it. I'm sorry, sir. To her surprise, Victor didn't seem angry. Instead, he looked tired, very tired. Yes. The answer was simple. I wrote many letters. Clara hesitated. Did he answer? Victor stared at the envelope. No. A painful silence filled the room. Finally, Clara asked, Did you send them? Victor slowly shook his head. The answer stunned her. No, none of them. No. Clara couldn't believe it. For years he had written letters, yet never mailed them. Why? Victor leaned back in his chair. For a moment he looked older than ever. Because I was afraid. The honesty surprised both of them. Victor rarely admitted weakness, yet the words had escaped before he could stop them. What were you afraid of? Clara asked gently. Rejection. The answer came immediately. If I sent them and he ignored them. His voice faded. The unfinished sentence said everything. For nearly a decade, Victor had chosen silence over risk. Not because he didn't care, because he cared too much. Every unsent letter represented hope and fear. Hope that Daniel might forgive him. Fear that he wouldn't. Victor looked at Clara thoughtfully. Tell me something. Yes, sir? Your father. Clara blinked. My father? You speak about him often. She smiled. I suppose I do. What if you argued? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? What if one day you had a terrible disagreement? Victor's eyes searched hers. What would happen? Clara didn't need long to answer. I'd talk to him. Even if he was wrong. Especially then. Victor looked away. The answer clearly affected him. Clara continued softly. My father and I don't always agree. No? She laughed. Not even close. For the first time, Victor smiled. Neither did Daniel and I. Then perhaps that's normal. The smile faded. Maybe. Clara looked toward the letters. Families argue. Yes, they disappoint each other. Yes, they make mistakes. Victor nodded slowly. Yes. Clara met his eyes, but they also forgive. The room became silent. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windows. Victor stared at the letters scattered across his desk. 10 years of silence. 10 years of regret. 10 years of waiting. Finally he asked, and if forgiveness never comes? Clara considered the question carefully. Then she answered, at least you'll know you tried. The decision. That night, Victor remained in his office long after everyone else had gone to sleep. The mansion was silent. The only light came from his desk lamp. Around him lay dozens of unsent letters. Some were short, some were several pages long. Each represented a conversation he had been too afraid to begin. For years, they had remained hidden inside a drawer. Safe, unanswered, unread. Tonight felt different. Slowly, Victor opened the newest letter, then another, then another. He reread words written over many years. Apologies, memories, regrets, love, everything he had never said aloud. Around midnight, he reached for a fresh sheet of paper. For a long time, he stared at the blank page. Then he began writing. Not as a businessman, not as a millionaire, not as a man concerned with pride, as a father. When he finally finished, the first rays of dawn were beginning to appear. Victor folded the letter carefully, placed it inside an envelope, and wrote a name he had not contacted in nearly 10 years. Daniel Ashford. This time the letter would not remain in a drawer. This time it would be sent. As Victor sealed the envelope, he felt something unfamiliar. Fear, hope, and perhaps for the first time in a very long while, faith. Because somewhere beyond Ravenhill, beyond the years of silence, beyond the mistakes and misunderstandings, his son was still out there. And soon Daniel Ashford would receive a letter that had taken 10 years to write. Whether it would heal their relationship or break Victor's heart completely, neither man yet knew. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5, a reply from the past. The next morning, the envelope sat on Victor Ashford's desk. For several minutes, he simply stared at it. A single letter, just a few pages of paper, yet it felt heavier than any business contract he had ever signed. For 10 years, fear had kept him silent. Now that silence was finally ending. Victor picked up the envelope and turned it over in his hands. Daniel Ashford. His son's name looked strange after so many years. Not because he had forgotten it, because he had avoided writing it, avoided speaking it, avoided facing everything it represented. Regret, loss, failure, hope. The office door opened softly. Clara entered carrying his morning tea. She immediately noticed the envelope. Victor noticed her noticing it. Neither spoke at first. Then Victor said quietly, "I haven't mailed it yet." Clara set the tea down. "You still can." Victor sighed. "What if he hates me?" The question sounded nothing like the confident businessman known throughout Ravenhill. It sounded like a worried father, a frightened one. Clara considered her answer carefully. "He might." Victor looked up. The honesty surprised him. "He might also miss you." The room became silent. Finally, Clara smiled. "You won't know unless you send it." Victor stared at the envelope for several more seconds. Then he stood. Without another word, he walked out of the office. An hour later, the letter was on its way. Waiting. The days that followed felt unusually long. Victor checked the mail every morning, every afternoon, sometimes twice in the evening. At first, he tried hiding his anticipation. That lasted approximately 2 days. By the third day, everyone in the mansion knew he was waiting for something. Mrs. Hawthorne noticed. The gardeners noticed. Even the cooks noticed. But nobody mentioned it. Nobody except Clara. One evening, she found Victor standing near the front windows, looking toward the entrance gates, waiting. "Still nothing?" she asked gently. Victor shook his head. "No, it's only been a week. It feels longer." Clara smiled. "That's because you're counting every day." Victor gave a reluctant nod. She was right, he was. For 10 years he had done nothing. Now every hour felt important. Every passing day felt significant. Every arriving carriage made his heart race, then disappointed him. Again and again. Across the country, nearly 400 miles away in the coastal town of Seabrook, a man opened his mailbox after returning from work. His name was Daniel Ashford, 36 years old, history teacher, husband, father, and for nearly a decade a son who had not spoken to his father. Daniel sorted through bills and advertisements before noticing a familiar handwriting. He froze. For a moment he simply stared, unable to move, unable to breathe. His father's handwriting. After all these years. The envelope trembled slightly in his hand. His wife, Emily, noticed immediately. "Daniel?" He looked at her. "It's from him." Emily's eyes widened. Neither needed clarification. There was only one person him could mean. Daniel sat down slowly. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, quieter. The past had just walked through the front door. For several minutes he stared at the envelope without opening it. His daughter, Lily, entered the room carrying a school project. "Daddy?" Daniel forced a smile. "One moment, sweetheart." Lily noticed the tension immediately. Children often noticed more than adults realized. She climbed into his lap. "Are you okay?" Daniel looked at the envelope, then at his daughter. Finally, he nodded. "I think so." With trembling fingers, he opened the letter. Words that matter. The letter was not long, yet every sentence carried years of emotion. Victor had not written about business, or money, or success. He had written about mistakes, about pride, about regret. Most importantly, he had written about love. For the first time in his life, Daniel saw his father speaking honestly rather than confidently. Not trying to win an argument, not trying to be right, simply trying to reconnect. One paragraph affected him more than all the others. I spent years convincing myself that time would solve everything. Instead, time only increased the distance between us. If I could relive that day, I would listen more and speak less. I cannot change the past, Daniel. I can only tell you that not a single year has passed without me thinking about you. Daniel read those lines 3 times, then a 4th, then a 5th. Emily sat beside him quietly. When he finally lowered the letter, tears filled his eyes. The anger he had carried for years suddenly felt different. Smaller somehow. Not gone, but smaller. He actually apologized. Emily squeezed his hand. I know. Daniel stared out the window. He never apologizes. A small smile appeared on Emily's face. Maybe people can change. Daniel wasn't sure. Yet for the first time he wanted to believe it. The reply back at Ashford Manor, another week passed. Still nothing. Victor tried focusing on work. Failed. He attended meetings, forgot half the discussions. He reviewed reports, barely read them. His thoughts remained fixed on one question. Had Daniel received the letter? Every morning brought disappointment, until one rainy Thursday afternoon. A delivery driver arrived carrying several envelopes. Mrs. Hawthorne sorted them as usual. Then she stopped, her eyes widened. Immediately she walked toward Victor's office, without knocking. A rare occurrence. Victor looked up from his desk. What is it? Mrs. Hawthorne held out a single envelope. His breath caught. The handwriting was unmistakable. Daniel. For a moment Victor simply stared, unable to move, unable to speak. After everything, after 10 years, after countless unsent letters, his son had written back. Thank you, he whispered. Mrs. Hawthorne quietly left the room. Victor was alone with a letter that could change everything, their home. His hands shook as he opened it. Daniel's response was longer than expected, much longer. The first lines were cautious, understandably so. Years of pain could not disappear overnight. Yet as Victor continued reading, hope began growing. Daniel wrote about his life, his teaching career, his wife, his daughter, the family he had built. He wrote about the argument that separated them, about the hurt he carried, about the disappointment. But he also wrote something Victor never expected to see. I was angry for a long time. Victor continued reading. Maybe part of me still is. His heart sank. Then he reached the next sentence. But another part of me missed my father. Victor closed his eyes. Emotion overwhelmed him. 10 years. 10 years of silence. And now these words, simple words, yet priceless. When he finally finished reading, tears rolled down his face. For the first time since Eleanor's death, he cried openly, not from grief, from relief. A new possibility. That evening, Clara found Victor in the restored garden. The letter rested beside him. He looked different, lighter, as though a burden had finally begun lifting. Good news? She asked. Victor handed her the letter. She hesitated. Are you sure? Yes. Clara carefully read it. A smile slowly appeared. He wrote back. Victor nodded. He did. A faint laugh escaped him. Apparently I have a granddaughter. Clara's eyes widened. You didn't know? No. The realization still amazed him. A granddaughter, an entire chapter of life he had missed. For years. What's her name? Clara asked. Lily. The name lingered in the air. Victor smiled. A genuine smile. One that reached his eyes. For a moment, Clara thought about the lonely man she had met months earlier. The man who sat alone in a giant dining room. The man trapped by grief and regret. That man still existed, but he was changing. Slowly, steadily, one step at a time. Victor looked toward the setting sun, then toward the mansion. Finally he spoke. He says he'd like to meet. Clara's smile grew. When? Victor laughed softly. Next month. For a moment, neither spoke. The significance of those words settled around them. Next month, after 10 years. Father and son would finally meet again, but neither knew what that reunion would bring. Because forgiveness is not a destination. It is a journey, and the hardest part of that journey was still ahead. End of chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Reunion. The news spread quietly through Ashford Manor. Daniel Ashford was coming home. Not permanently. Not yet. But for the first time in 10 years, Victor's son would walk through the doors of the mansion again. The announcement changed the atmosphere of the estate almost immediately. The staff became excited. The gardeners worked harder than ever. The cooks began discussing menus weeks in advance. Even Mrs. Hawthorne seemed happier. But nobody changed more than Victor. For years he had moved through life like a man carrying an invisible weight. Now there was energy in his step, purpose in his actions, hope in his eyes. Every day he checked the calendar. Every day he imagined the reunion. And every day he worried, because hope and fear often travel together. Preparing for a guest one morning, Victor called Clara into his office. She entered carrying her notebook. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Victor nodded, then surprised her. "I need your opinion." "My opinion?" "Yes," Clara smiled. "About what?" Victor stood and walked toward a nearby window. "The East Wing." "The East Wing?" "It hasn't been used in years." That wasn't entirely true. Everyone knew why the East Wing remained untouched. It had once belonged to Daniel, his bedroom, his study, his music room, his childhood memories. After Daniel left, Victor had ordered everything preserved exactly as it was. Nothing changed. Nothing moved. Time itself seemed frozen there. Victor looked thoughtful. "Do you think it should stay the same?" Clara considered the question carefully. "I don't know." Victor raised an eyebrow. "You don't know?" She shook her head. "If I came home after 10 years, I'd want to remember some things. And others? I'd want room for new memories too." Victor stared out the window. For several moments he remained silent. Then he nodded slowly. "I think you're right." Over the next few days, the East Wing was carefully refreshed. Nothing important was removed. But fresh flowers appeared. The furniture was restored. The rooms felt welcoming again, no longer frozen in the past, ready for the future. The longest week. As the reunion approached, Victor became increasingly nervous. Clara noticed immediately. One evening she found him walking through the gardens, then back toward the mansion, then through the gardens again, and back once more. He looked like a man rehearsing a speech. "You're worried," Clara said. Victor sighed. "Is it that obvious?" "A little." Victor sat on a stone bench. "What if everything goes wrong?" Clara sat nearby. "What if it goes right?" Victor laughed softly. "You always answer questions with questions. Only the difficult ones." The fountain bubbled quietly nearby. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Victor asked, "Do you think he can forgive me?" Clara thought carefully. "I think forgiveness isn't a single moment." "What does that mean?" "It means people don't wake up one morning and suddenly forget years of pain." Victor nodded. That sounded true, but they can choose to move forward. The words stayed with him long after their conversation ended. Arrival day. The morning finally arrived. Bright sunlight covered the estate. The sky was clear. The gardens looked beautiful. Everything seemed perfect, except Victor's nerves. By noon, he had checked his watch at least 20 times. At 1 o'clock, he reviewed business reports he couldn't concentrate on. At 2 o'clock, he abandoned work entirely. By 3 o'clock, he stood near the front entrance, waiting, watching, hoping. At exactly 3:30, a black car appeared beyond the gates. Victor's heart immediately began racing. The vehicle moved slowly along the driveway. Closer, closer, closer. Then it stopped. For a moment, nobody moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the passenger door opened. A man stepped out, Daniel, older, wiser, different, yet unmistakably Daniel. Victor stared. His son stared back. 10 years disappeared into a single moment. Neither knew what to say, neither knew how to begin. Then Daniel took a step forward. Victor did the same. The distance between them slowly disappeared. Finally, Daniel stopped. "So?" Victor smiled nervously. "So?" For a brief second, the situation felt almost absurd. 10 years of silence, and this was how it started. One awkward word. Then Daniel laughed. Victor laughed too, and suddenly the tension eased, not completely, but enough to begin. Meeting Lily. The rear door opened. A young girl jumped out of the car. Around 8 years old, bright eyes, dark hair, a curious smile. Lily, Victor's granddaughter. She looked around the estate in amazement. Then toward Daniel. "Dad?" Daniel smiled. "This is your grandfather." Lily examined Victor carefully. Victor suddenly felt more nervous than he had during any business negotiation in his life. "Hello," he said. Lily tilted her head. "You're really rich." The adults burst into laughter. Victor laughed hardest of all. After several seconds, he wiped tears from his eyes. "That's quite an introduction," Lily grinned. "My mom said I should be honest." Victor immediately liked her. A lot. "Your mother sounds wise." Lily nodded seriously. "She is." For the first time in years, genuine joy filled the entrance hall of Ashford Manor. Difficult conversations. The first day passed surprisingly well. Dinner felt awkward at times. Understandably, 10 years could not disappear overnight. Yet nobody argued, nobody shouted, nobody reopened old wounds unnecessarily. Instead, they talked about life, about work, about memories, about Lily's school, about history, about anything and everything. That evening, after Lily went to bed, Victor and Daniel walked through the restored garden together. The same garden that had once been abandoned. The same garden Eleanor had loved. The same garden that helped begin Victor's healing. Daniel looked around quietly. It looks beautiful. Victor nodded. It needed attention. Daniel smiled faintly. Mom would have approved. The words filled the air between them. For a moment neither spoke. Then Daniel looked at the fountain. The castle is still there. Victor followed his gaze. The tiny stone castle remained exactly where Daniel had placed it decades earlier. I never moved it. Daniel laughed softly. I was 10. It was important. Silence followed. A comfortable silence. Then Victor finally spoke. I'm sorry. Daniel looked at him. I know. No. Victor shook his head. You don't. His voice trembled. For years I convinced myself I was protecting your future. Daniel listened. I thought I knew what was best. Victor lowered his eyes. The truth is I was afraid. Afraid? Afraid you'd choose a life different from mine. Daniel stared at him. Victor continued. And instead of listening, I tried controlling. The admission seemed to cost him something. Yet it was honest. Completely honest. Daniel looked toward the fountain. For several moments he said nothing. Then he sighed. I wasn't innocent either. Victor blinked. What? I said things I regret. Daniel's voice softened. I was angry. So was I. A faint smile appeared. That was the problem. Both men laughed quietly. The sound echoed through the garden. Not because the past was fixed, but because they finally understood it, a family again. The visit lasted 4 days. 4 wonderful days. Victor spent time with Lily, told stories, played games, learned about her interests. Every moment felt precious, because every moment represented something he thought he had lost forever. One afternoon, Clara watched from a distance as Victor and Lily sat beside the fountain feeding fish. The scene reminded her of the stories he'd told about Daniel. For the first time, the mansion felt like a family home again. Not just a beautiful building, a home. Mrs. Hawthorne joined Clara. Remarkable, isn't it? Clara smiled. What is? The housekeeper looked toward Victor. The difference. Clara nodded. It truly was remarkable. The man who once ate every meal alone now laughed with his son and granddaughter. The man who had hidden from memories now created new ones. The man trapped by regret had finally found hope. And somehow it had all begun with something very small. A conversation, a cup of tea, an act of kindness. As the sun began setting over Ashford Manor, Clara realized something important. Victor's reunion with Daniel was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter filled with second chances, and perhaps a chance for Clara's own life to change as well, because Victor Ashford had not forgotten what she had done for him. Not even close. And soon he would find a way to thank her. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. The Greatest Gift. Summer arrived in Ravenhill, bringing warm sunshine and colourful flowers to Ashford Manor. The estate had changed dramatically over the past year. The gardens were alive once more. The hallways echoed with laughter instead of silence. Visitors arrived regularly. Most importantly, Victor Ashford was no longer alone. Daniel visited often with his wife and daughter. Some weekends they stayed for several days. Other times they came only for dinner. It didn't matter. What mattered was that they came. The distance that had once separated father and son was slowly disappearing, not because the past had been forgotten, because both men had chosen to move forward. And every time Lily ran through the gardens, every time Daniel laughed at the dinner table, every time family photographs were taken, Ashford Manor felt more like a home. Yet Victor knew none of this would have happened without one person. Clara Bennett, the young maid from Willow Creek, the woman who had arrived carrying a single suitcase and a kind heart, the woman who had changed everything. An unexpected invitation. One afternoon, nearly a year after Clara first arrived at the mansion, Victor asked her to meet him in his office. When Clara entered, she noticed Daniel was there too. Both men were smiling. Immediately, she became suspicious. What happened? She asked. Daniel laughed. Why does everyone assume something happened? Because both of you look like you're hiding a secret. Victor exchanged a glance with his son, then he gestured toward a chair. "Please sit down." Clara sat cautiously. The office suddenly felt very serious. Victor folded his hands. "Clara, I'd like to ask you a question." "All right. What are your plans for the future?" The question surprised her. "My future?" "Yes." Clara hesitated. She hadn't thought about it much recently. Most of her attention had focused on supporting her family, helping her father recover, sending money home, building a stable life. Victor waited patiently. Finally she answered, "I've always wanted to become a teacher." Daniel smiled immediately. A history teacher himself, he clearly approved. "You'd be good at it." Clara laughed softly. "I hope so." Victor nodded. "Why haven't you pursued it?" The answer was simple. University is expensive. Silence followed. Then Victor reached into a drawer. He removed a folder and placed it on the desk. Clara looked confused. "What is this?" "Open it." Slowly she did. As she read the contents, her eyes widened, then widened even more. She looked up, speechless. Victor smiled. "It's an acceptance package." Clara blinked. "What?" "A teaching program at Ravenhill University." Her hands began shaking. The folder contained enrollment documents, housing information, tuition details, everything except one thing, a bill. Clara looked at Victor, then Daniel, then back at the folder. "I don't understand." Victor leaned forward. "I would like to pay for your education." For several seconds, Clara simply stared, certain she had misunderstood. "You can't be serious." "I am." "No." She shook her head immediately. "That's too much." Victor smiled gently. "No." His voice softened. "It's not enough. Has a debt that cannot be measured." Emotion filled Clara's chest. She struggled to find words. "Mr. Ashford." Victor raised a hand. "Please let me finish." The room became quiet. For a moment, Victor looked toward the garden outside his window, then back at Clara. "When you arrived here, people saw me as a successful man." Clara listened. They saw wealth. He laughed softly. They saw power. His expression grew thoughtful. They saw a mansion. A pause. "But they didn't see me." The words settled heavily in the room. Victor continued. "They didn't see a man grieving his wife." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "They didn't see a father who had lost his son." Daniel lowered his gaze. "And they certainly didn't see someone drowning in regret." The silence felt emotional, powerful. Then Victor smiled. "But you did." Clara looked down, unsure what to say. "You treated me like a human being." His voice trembled slightly. "You listened." Another pause. "You cared." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Victor said quietly, "My family came back because you helped me find the courage to reach out." Daniel nodded. "It's true." Clara shook her head. "I didn't do that." "You did." Victor smiled. "You just don't realize it." News from Willow Creek. A few days later, Clara travelled home to Willow Creek. It was her first visit in months. As the train approached the town, excitement filled her heart. She couldn't wait to see her parents. When she arrived, her mother nearly cried with happiness. Her father hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. And for the first time in a long while, Thomas Bennett looked healthy, strong, recovered. The sight filled Clara with relief. That evening she shared everything. The mansion, the garden, Victor, Daniel, Lily, and finally the university offer. Her parents sat in stunned silence. Margaret was the first to speak. "A university?" Clara nodded. Her mother began crying immediately. Happy tears. The best kind. Thomas smiled proudly. "I told you." "Told me what?" "That you were stronger than you thought." Clara laughed through her tears. "You did say that." Her father nodded. "And now look at you." The small kitchen felt warmer than ever. For the first time in years, the Bennett family wasn't worried about survival. They were talking about dreams. A new journey begins. 3 months later, Clara stood outside Ravenhill University. Students moved across the campus. Professors carried books. Classes filled lecture halls. Everything felt exciting and terrifying. She adjusted the strap of her bag and smiled. A year ago, she had arrived in Ravenhill searching for work. Now she was beginning a completely different journey, a journey toward becoming a teacher. Victor and Daniel had insisted on driving her to campus. Even Lily had come. She jumped out of the car first. "You'll do great." Clara laughed. "Thank you." Lily hugged her tightly. Then Daniel shook her hand. Victor simply smiled. A proud smile, the kind a father gives a daughter. And for a moment, Clara realized something. Over the past year, Ashford Manor had become more than a workplace. It had become family. Not the family she was born into, the family she had found. 5 years later. The years passed quickly. Clara worked hard, studied harder, graduated with honours, and eventually achieved the dream she had carried since childhood. She became a teacher. Her classroom quickly became one of the most popular in the district. Not because she was strict, not because she was famous, because she cared. Every student felt seen. Every student felt valued, just as she had once helped Victor feel seen and valued. One spring afternoon, Clara received an invitation. Ashford Manor. Family gathering. She smiled immediately. Some things never changed. The lesson that lasted forever. That evening, Clara stood once again in the restored garden. The roses bloomed beautifully. The fountain sparkled. Children laughed nearby. Lily, now older, was helping her younger cousins feed fish. Daniel and Emily chatted with guests. Victor sat on the stone bench where he and Clara had shared so many conversations years before. When he saw her, he smiled. "Professor Bennett," Clara laughed. "You know I don't use that title." "I know." Victor looked around the garden. "It suits you anyway." They sat together quietly, watching the family enjoy the evening. Finally, Victor spoke. "Do you remember the first time you came here?" Clara smiled. "I was terrified." "You hid it well." "No, I didn't." Victor laughed. "No, you didn't." The sun slowly set behind the trees. Golden light filled the garden. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Victor said softly, "You changed my life." Clara shook her head. "No." A smile appeared. "We changed each other's." Victor considered that, then nodded. "Perhaps you're right." And as laughter echoed through the garden, surrounded by family, friendship, and love, both understood something important. Great changes do not always begin with grand actions. Sometimes they begin with a kind word, a listening ear, a simple cup of tea, one small act of kindness, the kind of act that can heal old wounds, reconnect broken families, create new futures, and change lives forever. The end moral of the story: kindness costs nothing, yet it can transform hearts, heal relationships, and create opportunities that last a lifetime.